Chapter 1. Under the Sky of Assur. In the heart of the city of Assur, on the banks of the Tigris River, stood the palace of King Samas, a man of imposing stature, with dark eyes that seemed to see beyond the natural earthly. Ruler of the northern region of Mesopotamia, he bore the title of issi'akum, governor anointed by the gods, guardian of the laws and sacred rites. His palace, built of sun-baked bricks, with high gates and alabaster sculptures depicting winged bulls, was more than a residence. It was a center of power, mystery and destiny. In the shadow of the throne sat his Queen Ninlil, a woman of cold elegance and an iron will. Her name meant Lady of Ninlil, the goddess of the winds, and no one dared to look her directly in the eye without permission. Although the sources have not preserved her memory according to official chronicles, her presence was felt in every corner of the palace, in the scent of incense in the sacred rooms, in the fine textiles that adorned the salons, and in the respectful silence with which the women of the court spoke her name. And the south wing of the palace, Queen Ninlil led her own court. There, the sound of fabrics woven on wooden looms intertwined with the murmur of prayers whispered by priestesses, and the bronze bells on the girdles of the maids brought the echo of a secret order. Each room had a purpose, one for prayers to the goddess Ishtar, another for storing gold and lapis lazuli jewelry, yet another for secret meetings with religious emissaries or women from allied nations. In this closed and hierarchical world, the queen was the master of all. The women around her, secondary wives, concubines brought through political alliances, royal sisters with ranks priestesses, guardians of children and devoted servants, they formed a feminine universe in which silence, loyalty and subtlety were worth more than big words. Some supervised the granaries and weaving workshops. Others administered the royal estates or prepared offerings for the gods. Life at the palace pulsed in a sacred rhythm. The passage of the day was marked by the cry of the scribe, who announced the hours of prayer, by the beating of drums during purification ceremonies, and by the songs in the Akkadian language that rose at night, when the queen raised her prayers for the city, family and gods. In this ancient universe, where power was divided between men and gods, Queen Ninlil was the mysterious bridge between the earthly world and the divine will. Behind the cedar gates, decorated with bas-reliefs and cuneiform inscriptions, was what the palace servants respectfully called the House of Women.No. Men entered there, except for high-ranking eunuchs, and only at the queen's summons. This was the residence of the chosen women, the secondary wives and concubines brought through political alliances, a silent but vibrant world full of hidden rivalries and fragile loyalties. Each woman who lived there had a name and a story. Some came from allied cities on the banks of the Euphrates, brought as peace offerings, adorned with jewels and promises. Others had been raised in temples and given to the palace by the high priests to strengthen their ties with the gods. All, without the exception, they sought to assert their place in the eyes of King Samas. But above all hovered the absolute authority of Queen Ninlil. The queen did not express her power through shouts or punishments. A look was enough, a silent gesture of the hand, and a woman could be sent into oblivion, to the edge of the palace, to the cold chambers of the common maids. Under her rule, harmony was imposed, and every woman knew that her rank depended not only on noble origin, but also on the respect shown to the queen. Secondary wives wore long dresses of indigo-dyed linen, embroidered with gold thread, but they were not allowed to wear the purple cloak of the mistress of the palace. The younger concubines, often silent and timid, learned the art of court behavior from the most senior in rank, how to walk, be silent, smile without defiance and hide their hopes. In their eyes, the union between King Samas and these women, it was not one of love, but of strategy. Political marriages linked cities and kingdoms. A concubine from.Der meant a non-aggression treaty with the south. A daughter of the king of Mari brought to the palace meant rights to a trade route. The children resulting from these unions were raised within the palace, but their education was overseen by the queen, who alone decided which child deserved to be raised in the shadow of the throne. Despite the seemingly placid silence, life within these walls was tinged with suspicion. Each woman was also an ambassador. Sometimes, a smile hid information discreetly delivered to her home city. Other times, a simple touch on the arm could signal a new alliance within the palace. But before the queen, all obeyed. Them. Ninlil was not just the king's wife. She was the guardian of their destiny, the unseen judge who decided who stayed and who was sent. Back in shameful silence, woman might win the king's favor for a night, but without the queen's blessing, she could become nothing more than a shadow among others. Thus was the silent weaving of female power at the court of Assur, not by sword, but by calculated smiles, by unspoken alliances, and by loyalty to the one woman who was never to be asked who she was. The Queen, a name spoken only in whispers. Ninlil. Chapter 2. The Women of the Goddess. Passing through a long vaulted corridor, lined with frescoes depicting ancient myths and sacred rituals, one reached the sacred part of the city, Ika, the temple complex dedicated to Assur and the goddess Ishtar. There, between high brick walls and silent courtyards, lived the priestesses, women chosen not only for their purity, but also for their noble blood, for many were daughters, sisters or cousins of the queen herself. The priestesses wore simple white robes, tied with red woolen belts, a symbol of their connection with the goddess. Their hair was tied with ribbons and silver bells, and their steps never rang on the stone of the temple, for they were taught to walk with the silence of the wind. Their names were not spoken in public, for they served not for glory, but for balance, between the world and the divine. Queen Ninlil had a special connection with these women in her youth. She too had been initiated into the secret rites of the temple of Ishtar, where she had learned to read the signs of dreams, sing sacred hymns in the Sumerian language, and anoint the statues of the gods with mixtures of resin and myrrh. Now, as queen, she patronized the temple, sent monthly gifts, and at least once each season, came accompanied by only a few maids to lock herself away for a whole night in the forbidden room, where only the great initiates were allowed to step. The priestesses were not simple supplicants. They kept the sacred archives, interpreted the will of the gods, supervised the purity of rituals, and took care of teaching the children chosen from among the nobility. Some knew how to write in cuneiform, on tablets of clay, prophecies and dreams sent by the gods. Others divined in oil or in the liver of a sacrificial lamb. The oldest were called Entu, brides of the god, women who had never married, having been given to Assur since birth. Although they lived in the temple, they were under the protection of the queen. No major decision, either in the palace or in the city, was made without first reaching the ears of the priestesses in secret. Then, through unseen channels, their words returned to the queen, guiding her steps like a silent oracle. It is said that the queen herself did not leave the palace without first receiving a dream interpreted by Entu Annabelti, the wisest of them. The relationship between Ninlil and these women was one of mutual respect and fear. The queen had worldly power, lands, jewels, armies of servants. But they had the key to the heavens. Every year, at the summer solstice, the priestesses anointed the queen with sacred oil in a secret ritual, in which the throne, crown and womb of the queen were blessed for fertility and balance in the kingdom. In a world ruled by men, these women, the queen and the priestesses, held in invisible hands what could not be written on tablets. The power invoked in whispers, in blood and in the stars. If the queen was the heart of the palace, then the royal mothers and sisters were its living memory. Heirs of ancient blood ties, bearers of the name of their ancestors, these women did not live in the shadow of the queen, but in a tense balance with her, between respect and rivalry. And the northern part of the palace, in a separate but well-guarded complex, lived the ladies of royal blood, the sisters of King Samus and his mothers, sometimes even grandmothers. Some they bore inherited priestly titles, such as Sujitu or Entu, having been temple servants since childhood. Others had once been wives of former kings and now maintained a quiet dignity, covered with heavy veils of damask wool and perfumed with rare oils. The most revered of them was the king's mother, the old Nabu, known for her piercing eyes and vivid memories of the previous era. A former priestess of the Temple of Enlil, she still retained influence, not only over her son, but also over the palace advisors. Although the queen held de facto authority, Nabu was seen as the unofficial matriarch, and her word, rarely spoken, carried weight. The relationship between Ninlil and these women was a complicated one. On the one hand, she recognized their rank and importance, participating in rituals and festivals with them, offering them symbolic gifts and letting them manage some of the palace reserves. On the other hand, the queen knew that at any moment a source of rivalry could arise. A younger and ambitious sister, a mother who regretted that her son had not chosen another wife, or a relative with influence in the temples. To maintain balance, Ninlil used diplomacy, silence and calculated gestures. She sent messengers with rare fruits from the palace gardens, sent fine fabrics for feasts and often asked the opinion of the king's mother before a major event, but not because she needed advice, but to recognize her role and subtly cut into her political momentum. The king's sisters, especially Belti and Ashratum, had both been educated in the temples and had religious titles in public. They accompanied the queen in processions and ceremonies. In private, however, each pursued her own agenda. Belti supported one of the concubines, the king, hoping that his grandson might become heir. Ashratum, in turn, cultivated relationships with the great scribes of the city, trying to build a circle of intellectual and spiritual influence. Despite these simmering tensions, the queen never excluded them. On the contrary, she integrated them into the architecture of power, knowing that a wise queen does not isolate powerful women, but offers them a role visible enough to feel seen, and controlled enough not to become dangerous. Thus, between oaths, rituals, and silences, royal blood wove its own games, and Queen Ninlil walked carefully between fragile loyalties and too long smiles. For in a palace where the goddess Ishtar guarded the border between love and war, every woman was a piece in a divine game, and none could be ignored. Chapter 3. Shadows of Loyalty. Under the high domes of the palace of Assur, beyond the stately chambers and solemnly decorated courtyards, pulsed a world hidden from the eyes of the great, the world of the maids and guardians of the royal children. They were women of no rank, no jewels, and no names spoken aloud in the palace councils. And yet, without them, the queen herself would have been more vulnerable than she dared to admit. Dawn. The palace came to life not with the sound of royal footsteps, but with the rustle of linen skirts, the hurried tramp of bare feet, and the coded whispers of the maids. They lit incense, washed the robes, tasted the wine before it was served to the king, and kept their silence like a second skin. Queen Ninlil personally chose her high-ranking maids, those women who accompanied her day and night, in the rest rooms, at bathing, or in sacred rituals. These were not simple servants. They were the eyes and ears of the queen, taught to read expressions, recognize tones of voice, and spot the steps of betrayal before they reached the inner courts. Some of these women came from modest but loyal families. Others were former concubines who had fallen from grace, forgiven, and brought back under a vow of silence. The oldest in service became the guardians of the royal children, wise women of few words and iron eyes, responsible not only for feeding and clothing the children, but also for shaping their character. The guardians of the royal children were, in fact, the first teachers of the future princes and princesses. They taught them to walk, to respect the goddess, to control their anger, and to keep the secrets of the palace. They knew the children's dreams, their fears, and sometimes even the small sins that the queen was not allowed to reveal. But they kept them, if necessary, with the same fidelity with which they kept the amulets hanging around their necks. The relationship of these women with the queen was silent but deep. Ninlil did not speak to them often, but he observed them closely. Servant who lied once was replaced the next day. One who cried silently was called and questioned directly. One who brought news by mistake was punished, but one who brought dangerous news was protected. It was said that the queen wrote the names of her most loyal women on tablets hidden in a clay chest, in a secret room of the palace, which only she and a single guardian could open. On the rare occasions when the queen went out to the city gates to bless the people, the servants accompanied her in an invisible circle, like a living wall of feminine protection. If one of them fell, another took her place without a word. If one betrayed, her disappearance was not announced, but the whole court understood. Through them, Ninlil saw everything, and through them she strengthened her reign. For a strong queen does not rule only over the great and noble, but also over those who whisper between the rafters, who know the hidden paths and who watch over the children in the middle of the night. The day in the royal palace began before the sun caressed the defensive towers, and in Queen Ninlil's room, sleep faded with the song of the maid who lit the first oil lamp. A clay tablet was carefully placed next to the bed, a list of prayers, the tasks of the day, and the names of the women who were to ask for an audience with her. The first hour was one of silence and purification. The queen was washed with rose water, perfumed with cedar resin, and dressed in garments chosen according to the position of the planets, as a palace astrologer whispered to her. After sipping a warm drink of dates and milk, she would go to the prayer room where, kneeling before the statue of the goddess Ishtar, she would whisper prayers for balance, for the peace of the palace, and for her husband. The morning hours were dedicated to private audiences, priestesses, concubines, officials, sometimes even female emissaries from other cities. The queen listened, asked short questions, and established order in the complicated world of her female court. During these meetings, she never raised her voice, but a simple raise of an eyebrow was enough to send a woman into favor, or into exile. Noon, the queen would retire. She would eat little, bread with sesame seeds, dried fish in honey and pomegranate, then drink cold water from silver vessels. During this time, she listened to old stories told by an old tutor or took the children to her bosom, to hold them close. Sometimes she read cuneiform tablets sent from the temples, reports of dreams, warnings from priestesses, prayers from the people. And the afternoon, she walked in the palace gardens, guarded by maids and eunuchs. She walked barefoot on the cold stones, talked to the flowers, gathered sacred herbs or watched, in silence, the clouds. It was the hour when she was not queen. It was only Ninlil, a woman born in the ancient city of Nineveh, daughter of a scribe and initiate of the temple. In the evening, after the sun had faded in the golden gourds of the towers, the secret hour began, the hour of love. On those nights, when King Samus was not away on campaign or in prolonged councils, the queen sent a sign through a red ribbon tied discreetly on the handle of the inner door. It was the silent sign that she wanted to receive him. The king understood, and he came. Not as a master, but as a male guest. The queen's room then became a living temple. The lamps burned with myrrh oil, the linen curtains danced in the breeze. Her skin was anointed with almond oil and cinnamon, and in her hair she had gold crescent-shaped hairpins, a symbol of divine femininity. When the king entered the room, the queen greeted him not as a subject, but as an initiate. She offered him wine with cinnamon, stripped him of his thoughts and armor, and placed him on their bed, a wide bed, with carved legs and a mattress made of gazelle wool. Between them there was not only desire, but also shared power. The queen loved him with slow ceremonial gestures. She spoke sacred words to him, spoken only in temples, blessed him with her palms on forehead and chest, as a fertility priestess would do. And that union, the god Assur and the goddess Ishtar were called upon to bless the bodies and give fruit to the womb. Sometimes, after love, they did not speak at all. Other times, he asked her for advice on a political decision. He confessed his fears to her. She listened to him with her eyes closed, touching his hand as if she were reading a prophecy. In those evenings, the queen was not just a wife. She was a confidant, an oracle, a lover and an ally. And in the silence that followed, wrapped in fine veils and dense dreams, Ninlil told herself that the reign was built not only with an army and a temple, but also with the love shared between two beings who knew that body and soul could be, at least for one night, as powerful as the laws of the gods. Chapter 4. The Festival of Invisible Masks. On the day of the spring equinox, when the sun and the moon stepped for a moment in the same celestial circle, the city of Assur stopped trading, and the palace gates opened wide for a single event. The festival of sacred fertility, dedicated to the goddess Ishtar and the god Assur, the sacred union that blessed the entire life of the city. For the queen, it was the moment of supreme visibility. Ninlil had prepared her garments weeks in advance, a white dress, sewn with gold thread and lapis lazuli stones, symbol of protective queens. In her hair she wore an ivory comb carved with mythical scenes, and on her ankles, bracelets that jingled discreetly, the memory of the silent walk through the temples of her childhood. The inner courtyard of the palace was filled early with women. The concubines, brought from distant kingdoms, displayed their exotic silk clothes and perfumes heavy, like a silent parade of fragile alliances. The temple priestesses, with watchful gazes and ritually painted faces, stood in line like guardians of mystery. The royal mothers and sisters had retreated under a canopy of white linen, speaking softly, words laden with suggestion. The maids ran from side to side, balancing amphorae, fruit, silver vessels, and restrained smiles. The feast was a staging of feminine harmony. But beneath the ceremonial veils, cracks were beginning to show. One of the concubines, a young woman from the kingdom of Mari, had dared to wear a necklace similar to the one reserved only for the queen. Rumors that the king was visiting her in secret were already circulating in hurried whispers. A senior priestess in the temple of Assur did not bow her head enough when addressing the queen, a subtle but dangerous sign that Queen Ninlil's authority was being challenged in silence. One of the king's sisters had brought her teenage daughter, dressed in an imperial cloak embroidered with solar symbols, an illusion that her family was in line for the succession? Or just a lack of tact? No one asked directly. Everyone felt. The celebration began with a procession. The queen walked in front, followed by a line of women carrying fruit, holy water, prayer tablets and votive statues. To the sound of sacred drums, each step was a choreography, a balancing act between power, appearance and loyalty. But in the queen's eyes, beyond the perfect smile, tension could be read. She felt that, for the first time in years, control was slipping through her fingers like sand leaking from a broken clock. In the evening, when the sacrifice was brought into the great courtyard, a white bull adorned with ribbons, the queen let her gaze roam the gathering. Each woman looked at her, but not all with submission. Some with curiosity, others with ambition, a few with fear, and one, maybe even two, with hatred. After the ritual at the festive feast, the wine flowed, but the words were weighed. The queen smiled, joked, blessed. But in her heart she made a list. There, in the shadow of golden songs, a new order had begun, one, unseen but inevitable. That night of celebration was never forgotten. It was the beginning of an era of tense silence, where every woman in the court wore a mask. Some for protection, others for attack, and the queen, though still revered, had learned from that day that, in a palace full of women, true power lies not in title, but in loyalty that is hard to buy and easy to lose. Although all eyes were often fixed on the queen, the true map of power did not end within the walls of the women's wing. On the other side of the palace, where tablets were read in whispers and decisions written in clay and blood, King Samus was surrounded by men with ranks, loyalties and ambitions difficult to decipher. They were not only subjects. They were the pillars of the throne, but also its silent dangers. The royal scribe, Nabu, a dry man with eyes like 2 drops of dried ink, and no one knew how old he was, but everyone knew that no word left the palace without him copying, checking, sealing it. It was said that he knew more secrets than all the ministers put together, and that in a tablet hidden in a brass box he kept a list of future traitors. He was favored by the king, but he was not loved, not even by the queen. Captain of the royal guard, Belsumu. A man of imposing strength, he wore a breastplate even in councils. He had sworn to die for the king and seemed ready to do so at any moment. He was loyal to the king, but not to the queen. He regarded her coldly, as if she were a political rival. It was said that he had been raised in a military temple and had never known doubt. Only the order. The privy councillor, Marduk. With modest clothes, but a soft voice and a sharp gaze. He was the most subtle man at court. He slipped between the rooms without being noticed, but he was present at all decisions, and no one knew if he was sincere or duplicitous. He was also the one who mediated the letters with the neighboring kingdoms, sometimes without the queen knowing. A cold relationship was woven between him and Ninlil, not out of hostility, but out of mutual caution. The supreme judge, Assur, an old man with trembling hands and a mind as clear as the waters of the Euphrates. He took no part in political games, but when he spoke, even the king listened. He had witnessed the coronation of 3 kings. He was perhaps the only one the queen sincerely respected, because he had no agenda, only law. The king's brother's son, Zabadilu, a handsome, ambitious young man, recently brought to the palace. He had been raised at an Eastern court and had returned with modern ideas and a pride that was hard to temper. It was said that he had a close relationship with one of the concubines. The queen regarded him with suspicion. The king with a mixture of affection and fear. If the future was his, it would be a different future. These men formed the male court of Samus. In front, they were loyal to him. Behind, each sharpened his tablet, hoping for another's misstep. The queen knew them all. She could not command them, but she could anticipate their movements. Sometimes she sent them gifts. Sometimes, only silence. Every gesture, every absence counted. The court was a double game. The women fought with smiles and perfume, the men with words and spies. And, in the middle of this universe, the king was the loneliest man. Chapter 5. The North Tower. The days passed slowly after the fertility festival. The queen felt the eyes of the world upon her, but there was something else that troubled her. The eyes of one man, eyes that, though they did not scrutinize her with impudence, followed her silently in every council, every procession, every official meeting. Marduk, the privy councillor, was a man of shadows and silence. But lately, his silences had become oppressive, full of anxiety, and an unseen struggle could be guessed in his gaze. The meeting took place in the palace reading room on a warm afternoon, with the windows open to the hanging gardens. The queen spent an hour a day there, consulting administrative tablets. Usually, he silently assisted her, noting, interpreting, bringing information. But that day he stood, hands clasped behind her back. She did not speak for a few moments. Then, in a low, even voice, she said, "Your Majesty, I cannot forgive myself for what I am about to say, but I cannot remain silent any longer. Every day I bow to the throne and look at you, and it is no longer service that binds me to you, it is something else. The fire that has been burning in me for so long can no longer be hidden. I love you. The queen looked up from the tablet. Her hand remained suspended above the clay. For the first time, words left her. Around her, the silence had become dense, like a velvet tent. Her gaze betrayed no fear, but was filled with amazement. There was not anger on her face, but a painful distrust. She was silent for a while, then she said only this. Tonight and the North Tower. The North Tower was a rarely used wing of the palace, high, with windows open to the fields beyond the city walls. Upstairs, on the top level, the queen had a secret chamber, a place of refuge, unknown to many, where she retreated on long winter nights or when her dreams were too heavy. When Marduk arrived, the door was ajar. The queen stood by an oil lamp, dressed in simple, homely clothes, her hair loose, no crown, no jewelry. You did not come as a subject, she told him. You came as a man. But I will go as a servant, if that is what you ask. I still ask for nothing, she said. I'm still learning what it means to be desired by someone who doesn't want my crown, but my soul. He didn't come closer, he just fell to his knees, in an unexpected, profound gesture. His hands remained on his chest, his head bowed. The queen sat down next to him, on the cool stone floor. For a few moments, two people breathed in unison, without titles, without fear, without shield. If you truly loved me, she whispered, you would know how dangerous my love is. It doesn't save, it demands everything. He looked up. There was a determination in his eyes that she had never seen even in her king. And I still want her. That evening, no one passed through the northern corridor, no maidservant came, no soldier was sent. At the top of the palace, between shadows and desire, the queen let her heart beat outside the throne for the first time. But their love was not a gift, it was a double-edged sword. And at dawn that night, the queen knew, what would come would not be easy to hide. The love between Ninlil and Marduk grew like a wild fire, smoldering deep within the palace walls. In secret, they found refuge in unknown corners and forgotten rooms, in the flickering light of oil lanterns and in the whispers that echoed in the deserted halls. Nothing seemed to be able to defeat their desire. Neither social distance, nor the difference in rank, nor the imminent danger. In those days, the queen was learning to be more vulnerable than ever before. Beside Marduk, she could drop her shield of formality and be just Ninlil, the woman beyond the shining crown. In one of those secret meetings, in the hidden chamber of the North Tower, he looked at her with an intensity that shattered her inner walls. There is nothing in the world that would make me give up on you, even if I lose everything. But you must know, this love is a sword that will cut us both ways. The queen replied with a sad smile, holding his hands carefully. I know. But if we risk nothing, then we are not truly alive. But tell me, Marduk, what will you do if the truth comes out? If they catch me? Or worse, if the king himself finds out? He was silent for a moment. Then he said decisively, then I will fight. For you. For us. There is no other way. But the world in the palace was merciless. Subtle rumors began to circulate in the courtyard. Long looks, whispered words, gestures understood only by those with sharp ears. Servant with two open ears overheard a conversation between two concubines. I saw Marduk descend into the North Tower at midnight, with the queen. This cannot remain hidden for long. Their fire will set the entire court ablaze. The queen and Marduk decided to reinforce their silence with codes and signals, to move their meetings to safer, less accessible places. But with each passing day, the risk grew. One night, when the moons were hidden behind heavy clouds, they were almost caught by a soldier who had unexpectedly returned from patrol. A moment before the door opened, Marduk pulled the queen into the shadow of a thick curtain and fell, silent in the face of the threat. That moment of fear was like a fire that ignited the flame between them even more. But in the palace of Assur, where every step was watched, every word could be listened to, a mad love was also a condemnation. And while the queen and her advisor wove a web of love and caution, the shadows gathered to catch them. Deep in her heart, Ninlil knew, soon, their choice would have to be made: to fight for love or to hide for eternity. Far from the hustle and bustle of the palace, south of the royal enclosure, stood imposing Ika, the temple complex dedicated to the god Assur and the goddess Ishtar. The high walls of raw brick preserved the millennial silence of the rites, the eternal smell of incense and the footsteps of those who walked only with a pure soul. There lived the consecrated priestesses, women chosen from the noblest nations, educated in the divine mysteries since childhood. They were not simple servants of the gods, but bridges between people and heaven, keepers of the sacred mysteries, healers and judges at the same time. Among them was Suil, Queen Ninlil's cousin, a woman of silent beauty, with closed eyes in color and a soft voice, which retained in it the weight of an old acquaintance. They had grown up together, but destinies had separated them in adolescence, one to the throne, the other to the temple. On a clear night, Suil crept into the palace through an old entrance, guarded by a eunuch who had once been entrusted to her as a guardian. She was led silently to the queen's private chamber in the west wing, where Ninlil contemplated the stars through a high window. "My queen," the priestess said, bowing deeply. "You need not call me queen," Ninlil replied, rising and embracing her. "You have seen my childish tears. And it is for that child that I come to you today," said Suil. "I have felt the call of the goddess Ishtar in the temples. The heavens are troubled, dreams are broken. You carry an unseen weight, which you cannot hide from those who serve between the worlds." The queen felt her heart tighten. "Have you heard rumors?" "No, I don't need rumors. I feel the trembling in your blood. And Ishtar sent me a dream. You, shrouded in clouds of ash, with two flames burning your heels. One was love. The other, shame." Then she spoke, without asking permission. "You must come to the temple of Ika. For one night, a purification. Not for the gods, but for yourself. What burns within you must be cleared." The queen was silent for a long time. She knew that a step into the temple, without an official announcement, without a procession, was a deviation from protocol. She knew that all the eyes of the court would feel her absence and that any shadow on her face could become an occasion for gossip or suspicion. But she knew something else, the flame of her love for Arad. Marduk burned her from within. And she could not continue without a clarity. The temple, the childhood, the goddess, everything called her back. "I will come," said Ninlil, "but no one must know. Not even him." "It will be as if you were never there," smiled Suil. "Only the goddess will know." And so the next night, dressed in a simple cloth garment, her face covered, the queen left the palace through a subterranean corridor, generations old, led by her cousin into the sacred silence of Ika. There, in the moonlit courtyard of the temple, under the eye of the stars and the scent of myrrh, the queen would find out whether her love was a gift or a curse. Chapter 6. The Vision. In the deep silence of Ika, Queen Ninlil walked barefoot on the cold stone slabs of the inner courtyard. It was night, but the flames of the bronze lanterns danced on the temple walls, casting shadows of priestesses murmuring prayers in a sacred language so ancient that even the palace scribes no longer wrote it down. She was dressed in a thin, insignificant linen robe, no jewelry, no crown, queen without a throne. Just a woman before the gods. Suil, in robes of azurite and faded gold, silently led her to the purification chamber, a low, round room, the walls of which were covered with alabaster slabs carved with cosmic scenes. The goddess Ishtar holding a bow and a lotus flower in her hands, Assur with the solar eye, looking straight into the souls of Men and the middle of the room, a bathtub hollowed out of the stone, filled with holy spring water, in which floated nard petals and white incense threads. Above, an opening opened to the sky, letting the moonlight penetrate like a silver spear. "Leave everything earthly at the door," whispered Suil. "Enter only with your heart." When Ninlil stepped into the water, a shiver ran through her. It was cold as the beginning of the world. The priestesses began to sing softly, an ancient hymn about Ishtar, the protector of forbidden loves, the fighter who punishes and heals alike. Suil carefully poured a bowl of cedar oil on the queen's head and said, "Let doubts be washed away. Let the knots in the soul be untied. Let hidden desires be burned in the light. What will remain will be what the gods choose." The queen closed her eyes. Then, the world retreated. A vision came. She saw herself in a desert, dressed in black, holding in her hands a cage with a red bird that did not stop singing, and the distance, the palace, but ruined, in flames. Arad Marduk, was coming towards her, wounded, with his hands outstretched. But behind him, an eagle with the face of the god Assur was approaching in flight. She wanted to shout, but her voice was swallowed by the wind. Then, from the cage, the bird came out on its own, rose and transformed into the goddess Ishtar herself, with wings and eyes of fire, who told her, "Love that does not burn a world is not the love of a goddess. But what burns can never return." When Ninlil opened her eyes, the water around her was calm. The lights slowly dimmed, and the priestess's song turned into a whispered murmur, like the wind among the rocks. Alta knelt beside her and wiped her face with a white cotton cloth. "What did you see?" The queen answered, her voice trembling. "That my love is fire, and that it will take everything if I do not choose well. Ishtar showed me that I will not be able to save everyone." That night, the queen slept in the temple, under the unmoving gaze of the goddess's idol. And at dawn, when she returned to the palace, it was no longer just Ninlil the queen. She was the woman who had chosen to burn or extinguish the fire of love, with all the consequences that would follow. When Queen Ninlil returned to the palace from the temple of Ika, nothing seemed to have changed on the surface. The eunuchs followed their silent routes, the concubines murmured between the curtains, and the garden sighed under the weight of evening flowers. But in the heart of the palace, in the heart of the throne, something had broken. King Samus, silent for days, was waiting for her in a cold hall, where only 2 bronze lions still seemed alive. "You were at the temple without notice. You were absent from my bed, from your duties. And you were seen around Marduk." His voice was not angry, he was of stone. The queen stood upright, without ornaments, without shields. Just her and her truth. "I needed to be cleansed. The goddess called me, and to guided me. I do not deny what I feel, but I returned with my soul cleared." The king stood up. His black hair, streaked with white, was tied tightly, and his beard trimmed as before a judgment. Marduk was arrested at dawn. He will be executed at sunset. And you will be present to learn what happens when a man forgets who his queen belongs to. The queen froze, a shiver ran down her spine, but she did not cry. She did not scream. She only said, "If I stand and watch him die, then you have won. But you will lose what you love about me. And I will no longer be your queen, but only the shadow of a woman on a stone throne." There was a sharp silence. Then the king approached her. He placed his heavy hand on her shoulders and said, "I took you for your blood, but I loved you for the fire in you. If Ishtar has forgiven you, then I will too." Then, with a dry gesture, he said to the eunuch, "Let him be exiled, Marduk. Let him depart today to the eastern walls. Let my eyes never see him again." That same evening, in the chamber of steam and incense, the king called the queen back to his bed. She came, not as a punishment, but as a choice, with clean skin and a reconciled soul. They stood silently, side by side, without hasty gestures, a new beginning to perhaps just a truce. "And what will you ask for your peace?" the king asked. "That to be elevated to the rank of high priestess of Ika. She kept me whole. She brought me back." The king agreed. "So be it. Women who save queens cannot be left in the shadows." The next day, Suilta was brought to the throne room of the moon, dressed in the blue robes of the Ika. With dozens of priestesses behind her, she was crowned high priestess, before the court of nobles and scribes. Queen Ninlil stood behind her, and their eyes met for a moment, a silent covenant, promise between sisters of blood and suffering. Marduk, accompanied by a silent guard, departed east. Not a word. Only a letter wrapped in leather, which was given to the queen in secret. She opened it only after 3 days, in the forbidden garden. It was not the queen I love who looked on silently, but the woman who saved me with her pain. "I live. And where I live, I love. And where I love, I will wait." The desert wind blew hard over the plain east of the city of Assur. Under a sky of copper and clouds of dust, Marduk rode handcuffed, guarded by 3 silent soldiers. He was not spoken to, he was not given weapons, but he was alive, and that meant everything. They had reached the inner borders, the edge of the realm where the king's power was beginning to fade, and the loyalty of the people was becoming a matter of gold, blood, or religion. His destination was a place forgotten by many, the fort of Kassapar, a military and agricultural settlement on the riverbank, where Assyria sent its deserters, old warriors, and uncomfortable elements. "Here you will live, or you will die. No one cares," the sentry commander told him before leaving him alone in front of the fort's wooden gates. The days passed slowly. Marduk had become a simple laborer, cutting wood, repairing dams, driving mules. His arms burned in the sun, and his shoulders had been broken not by the whip but by silence. But every evening, he returned to a simple hut, with mud walls and a thatched roof, where he kept a small leather bag, with a lock of black hair tied with gold thread, all that was left of Queen Ninlil. When he raised his eyes to the stars, he wondered, does she also think of me beyond beyond her vows as wife and queen? After months of work, he had begun to be viewed differently. He was clean, upright, didn't poke his nose into other people's business, and knew how to keep quiet. An old scribe of the fort, Belismiani, noticed him and gave him new tasks, translating messages into Old Akkadian, copying border maps, and sometimes coded letters to the capital. Marduk knew what he was doing. He was becoming useful again. And where he was useful, he had power again. But one night, while copying a map, he discovered a strange fragment, a secret signature, recognized from his days at the palace. It was the queen's. You are still alive. And as long as you breathe, a fire smolders in the palace. In the following months, coincidences began to appear. A merchant from Akkad brought him a lapis lazuli ring lost in the cargo. An Assyrian monk he asked for lodging at the fort and, in lieu of payment, left him a fragment of a hymn dedicated to Ishtar, with an underlined verse. She who hides her love in the eagle's dream will release it when the sky falls. He knew. Ninlil had not forgotten him. But the danger was always present. A young officer, Nobuatur, suspected that Marduk had once been more than a scribe or a laborer. One evening, drunk, he asked him, "You were a favorite in the palace, weren't you? Have you achieved what only kings achieve?" Marduk smiled. He did not answer. But the next night, he buried the bag with the lock of hair under the floor of the hutn case. When spring came, and a royal caravan stopped at Kasapa for inspection, Marduk knew something was coming. A choice, a mission. Or a condemnation. A man in a white cloak handed him a clay tablet covered in wax. It was sealed with the seal of the high priestess of Assur. The time is approaching. Soon, courage will be needed. The queen has not forgotten. Patience and cold blood. In his exile, Marduk became not just a survivor, but a silent symbol of a love that had not died, a flame waiting to burn again, in due time. Chapter 7. The Silent Visit of an Heir. It was past 3 in the morning when the queen's personal maid, Abitu, announced an unexpected visit. On the threshold of the cool room in the west wing of the palace stood Zabadilu, the son of King Samus's brother. Young, tall, with almond eyes and a fine linen tunic sewn with silver thread, Zabadilu was not accustomed to discreet visits. But that day, he walked with calculated care, almost with humility. "Queen Mother," he said, bowing, "I come not as a prince, but as a man who owes you your silence." The queen watched him from the low table where she read an ancient hymn dedicated to Assur. "I would like to know why my silence arouses such gratitude in you," she said coldly, but with a slight smile at the corner of her lips. Zabadilu approached, whispering, "I know you have learned my connection with Beltir. You have not said anything to my uncle, and that means more than I can express." Beltir, a woman of rare beauty, with skin the color of honey and eyes as green as Babylonian glass, had been one of the queen's closest confidants in times of mystery. Wise, delicate, but also unusually brave for a concubine. The fact that she loved Zabadilu had not escaped the queen. "Love is not a crime," the queen said, closing the tablet. "But alliances in the palace are sometimes more deadly than daggers." Zabadilu leaned closer. His eyes shone not only with gratitude, but also with a hidden fever. "My uncle is weak. You hold him upright, but his age is coming upon us. The palace needs a future, a brave, open future, unfettered by temples and traditions. Help me, Queen Ninlil. Together we can build that future to become king. You, true Queen Mother, and Beltir to remain by your side, as always." The queen rose. The silence lasted a long time. "Give me a week of silence, and I will give you a life of truth," she said. Zabadilu smiled. "You have 1 week, but then you will have to decide, the past or the future." That same evening, accompanied only by 2 maids and without announcement, the queen went again to Ika, the sacred temple of Assur and the goddess Ishtar. She was received in the night court by the high priestess Suil, who brought her weightless words. "The goddess has placed a fragile balance in your hands. If you blow, it breaks. If you remain silent, it buries itself. What do you want to choose, queen?" That same night, in the sacred garden of the temple, the The queen requested a meeting with Beltia. The concubine came with her head covered, but her eyes showed not fear, but trust. You loved Marduk, and yet you returned to the king. Perhaps you can understand my love, Beltia said. The queen looked at her carefully. Do you love Zabadilu for him, or for what he could become? For both. But I can control him. Maybe I am the key to a future where you will not be erased from the temple walls. The queen smiled. Not bitterly, but with that kind of smile that women learn after they have lost everything and survived. Then listen to me carefully, Beltia. If Zabadilu makes a move before I give him the answer, I will destroy him. Not for the king, but for the palace. For all of us. You have 7 days. The next day, the queen retreated to the meditation chamber of the Ika. She asked not to be disturbed. There, within the cold walls of the sanctuary, she began to write a message on a special tablet, which only one man would receive. Marduk, you were banished for what you felt. Now is the time to return for what you are. If you can reach the southern watchtower unseen, you will find my sign there. The future is breaking in two, and I am at the crossroads. The palace was quiet, but silence was never a sign of peace. It was the clearest sign that between the thick walls, under the polished flagstones and the shadows of the curtains heavy, the invisible threads of politics, passion, and betrayal were woven. Queen Ninlil was in no hurry. Day. She began with a discreet visit to the office of the chief scribe of the royal archives. She asked to see the lists of gifts offered by Zabadilu in the past year, who had received gold, who had been favored with fine clothes, who had been sent on diplomatic visits. The names appeared like black birds in the sky: young officials, garrisons from the east, scribes from her father's old court. He is preparing his ground. The queen said to herself, as her delicate fingers smoothed the corners of a tablet. Day 2. He called the old eunuch Aramenu, former tutor of the king's brother, a man whom the world had forgotten, but who listened better than he spoke. He asked him for a story. About the child Zabadilu, about the root of his ambition, about his fears. He was afraid of dreams. He had nightmares that he was falling into a bottomless pit. He said that only if he reached the top on the throne could he stop the fall. But he does not love the king. He despises him. He respects you, and fears you. The queen smiled. It was not a smile of satisfaction. It was the smile of a woman who had just found a chink in the armor of a future king. Day 3. She requested an audience with Beltia in the inner garden, under the date vine. Neither sat down. Their gazes were equal. If you were in my place, what would you do? The queen asked. I would buy time. And I would keep the heart of the man I want close to me. But what if that man could destroy everything I have built? Then I would turn him into the guardian of that everything. Or I would lose him knowingly, but with my head held high. Day 4. The queen locked herself in the small library in her wing. She read the sacred manuscripts and forbidden passages about the power of the hidden goddesses. Queen Mother, he said, bowing. Queen Mother, he said, bowing. I come not as a prince, but as a man who owes you your silence. I come not as a prince, but as a man who owes you your silence. It is said that Ishtar did not forgive women who chose silence when it was time for war. It was the day the queen understood that postponement was not an eternal solution. She counted the days on the corner of a tablet with her nails. Day V. She received news that 2 officers of the Northern Guard had been sent on a mission by Zabadilu, without the king's knowledge. The queen summoned the palace captain. When 2 soldiers leave without royal orders, who is responsible for the blood that might flow? The one who is silent, my lady. Not the one who sent. Then let us not be silent, she said. A secret message was written and sent to the high priestess. Another, to the southern tower. Day 6. He met the king in the privy hall. He was tired, his eyes red from wine and crying. He was trying to remember why people had once respected him. Zabadilu seems foreign to me, he said. But blood is blood. It is not blood that builds thrones, but loyalty. Be careful, my lord. There is a cold current blowing from the east. The king closed his eyes and squeezed the queen's hand. Perhaps he knew. Perhaps he did not want to know. Day 7. He called Suil too. They stood together on the high terrace, looking out at the towers of the Iker temple. If I choose war, blood will flow in the palace. If I choose silence, blood will flow in the city. What advice do you give me, priestess of the goddess Ishtar? Suil placed his hand over the queen's and said. The goddess does not send her servants into the darkness. If you must strike, do it with justice, not with hatred, and above all, not with fear. When the sun went down and the stars appeared in the sky, the queen sent a cryptic message. You will receive my answer in the sacred temple. Not before, not after. Try to follow me with force, and the echo will speak. The wind blew dryly over the reddish earth of the north. The stars burned silently in the night sky, and the silhouette of a man on horseback was visible at the edge of the horizon. Marduk, exiled, betrayed, forgotten, still lived. He had been called back by an ancient sign, cut with a gold needle on a tiny tablet, hidden in a bronze statuette, the southern tower. 3 nights after full moon, he had arrived near the city secretly, with his beard trimmed short, his clothes stained with. He had arrived near the city secretly, with his beard trimmed short, his clothes stained with dust, but his eyes the same. Entering the secret tunnel that connected the tower to the palace had been like returning to the womb of a memory. He was walking in the dark, but he knew exactly how many steps he would take until he saw her again. Queen Ninlil was waiting for him. She wore a thin cloak, with gold embroidery, but her shoulders were bare. Her eyes were moist, lips bitten. When she saw him, she said nothing. They ran towards each other, no words were needed. Their love broke out like a storm held back too long, bodies pressed together, breathing mixed, whispers muffled in their throats, caresses that remembered each other's shape. Under the cold stone of the tower, the fire of their passion burned silently but intensely, until late at night. Then, naked and tired, they spoke. We can't run away anymore, Ninlil said. We are no longer dreamers, we are what the world has made of us. Then let's remake this world, let's convince the king to abdicate. Without blood. Only with dignity. I know him. He will feel it's the end. But he will give in if there is love in his bed. Maybe he will leave in peace. And so it was. That night, the queen entered the king's bedroom with a gentleness she hadn't felt in years. The old king smiled, surprised. You came. Yes, I have been purified, I am yours. They loved each other slowly, like two strangers who find each other. He trembled under her fingers. She cried silently. And when it was all over, the king drank a last cup of wine, put his hand to his chest and said, in a weak voice, I know you betrayed me, but I love you too much, and I chose to be my punishment. Her heart stopped. Silence. The queen remained next to the inert body, her forehead on his cold chest. She cried. Not for power, not for guilt, but because a part of her, pure and sincere, had truly loved him. But life had already stolen it from her, with each year that passed between them. When dawn broke, the news spread through the palace with the speed of a broken tablet. The king is dead. The queen is a widow. The throne is naked. Servants were crying. Soldiers were waiting for orders. Priestesses were lighting incense. Ninlil rose from the bed, covered her body with the royal cloak, and said only this. Prepare the palace. Not for mourning, but for change. Chapter 8. The Coronation. For 3 days and nights, the royal palace of Assur was plunged into silence. Incense burned incessantly in the inner courtyard, and funeral songs echoed in a jerky rhythm in the temple of Assur. The king, a man who had reigned for nearly 40 years, had been carried on the shoulders of 4 priests to the tomb of the kings, carved into the sacred rock to the south of the city. Queen Ninlil walked at the head of the procession, dressed in black, her hair loose and her forehead bare. She had wept, but silently, not for show, but for a part of her that had remained by the man, despite all his wounds. After the funeral, that same evening, the queen convened a small council in the great hall of white stone. Beside her stood the high priestess Suil-Tu, dressed in the golden robes of the goddess Ishtar. They were called Bel-Sumu, the captain of the royal guard, a silent man with a broad chest and obsidian eyes, Assur, the supreme judge of the city, with a long, straight beard, known for his balance and sobriety, Zabadilu, the son of the king's brother, a handsome, proud and cunning young man, with an expensive cloak and a cautious smile. The queen sat on the low silver throne, and her voice was clear. It is time to talk about the future of the throne. About who will be the sovereign of this city and its people. What do you say, the most trusted men of the past king? For a few seconds, no one spoke. Only the footsteps of the servants on the cold flagstones and the crackling of a burning oil pot could be heard. Then, in a solemn gesture, Bel-Sumu knelt down. The queen was the light of the king. May she be our light too, I, captain of the guard, lay my life at your feet. Assur made the same gesture, bowing. The law recognizes wisdom and courage. You are the only living and legitimate legacy. The people will follow a queen. If they do not follow you, they will break in two. The high priestess stepped forward. The goddess Ishtar taught me that women can wear both sword and crown. The divine will is with you. Everyone turned to Zabadilu. He was silent. His gaze narrowed. He breathed heavily. But under the weight of the gazes, of the charged silence, he gave in. He bent to his knees. Not out of faith, but out of fear. Long live Queen Ninlil. The queen understood. Cowardice needed no words. The next day, in front of the great temple of Assur, the priests anointed her with sacred oil, the soldiers raised their spears in the air, and the people shouted, "Long live Queen Ninlil, mother of the city, woman of the throne, anointed by the gods." The heavy golden crown with lapis lazuli was placed on her forehead. She did not smile. She knew that the beginning of a reign was more dangerous than the end of the previous one, and the weeks that followed the coronation, the royal palace began to change. The echoes of the old king's reign faded, and the new chambers of power were filled with different footsteps, younger voices, braver ideas. Queen Ninlil did not remove anyone brutally. She knew that true power spreads like a rare perfume, invisible, but unforgettable. And the first man secretly summoned to the council chamber was Marduk. Returning from exile, the man who loved her with all his being was not invested with pompous titles. The queen simply called him the Shadow Counselor. He had his own apartment in the south wing, a cramped office, filled with maps and messages from the provinces. He watched over the couriers, over the trade movements and the rumors in the market. Not everyone knew of his presence. But those who knew, kept quiet to preserve the fragile balance of the palace. The queen chose to bring close Zabadilu, the nephew with royal ambitions, but defeated by his own fear. A surprising move, Ninlil named him Man of Secrets to the crown, responsible for diplomatic relations with the courts of the East and West. Because you know how powerful and proud people think, being one of them, she had told him. But the real surprise was the appointment of Beltir-Emadu, Zabadilu's secret lover and former concubine close to the queen, to the position of Keeper of the Female Seal, a position created by the queen herself, with the role of coordinating the circle of influential women in the palace, maids, priestesses, noble ladies and secondary wives. Beltir-Emadu thus became the queen's eyes and ears among the women of the court, but also the confidant of the most delicate matters. Through this refined game, the queen intertwined loyalty, love and duty, in a circle almost impossible to break. Zabad, initially reluctant, began to blossom again. The glances between him and Beltir, once hidden, had become gentler, more sincere. The queen had encouraged them, understanding that a beloved man is a man faithful. With every smile of Beltir, Zabad softened. Marduk, on the other hand, remained in the shadows. He was the one who entered the queen's room at the latest at night, through a secret corridor, and disappeared before dawn. Between them, love was still a clandestine flame, but burning and dangerous. Far from the eyes of the world, but close to the center of power.